The first bouquet came exactly 1 year after he died. I remember because that morning I'd promised myself not to cry. It was my birthday, and I'd woken up determined to make it through the day without turning it into another memorial. The sky was overcast, the kind of pale gray that makes the world look softer, quieter, as if even the sun didn't want to intrude. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the empty chair across from me. His chair, the one I still couldn't bring myself to move. That's when the knock came. It was light, almost hesitant. When I opened the door, there was no one there, just a small arrangement sitting on the mat. White lilies, blue irises, and a single red rose in the center. His favorite combination. My breath caught in my throat. There was a card tucked between the stems. No handwriting, just printed letters that read, "Happy Birthday, Anna. With love, M." My hands trembled as I touched the rose. M. Mark. My husband. My husband who died 12 months ago on a wet stretch of road just outside town, the night before my 31st birthday. I could still hear the officer's voice when he came to my door that night. I could still remember how the world went completely silent before collapsing in on itself. I thought it was a mistake. The flowers, the card, all of it. Someone's cruel prank, or maybe a mix-up from the florist. But the delivery slip had my name, my address, and no sender listed. I called every flower shop in town. None of them had the order. By the time the sun set that night, I was sitting at the table again, the bouquet in front of me, the scent of lilies thick in the air. I told myself it couldn't be him. I told myself the universe doesn't send miracles wrapped in cellophane. But when I went to bed, I put the card on the nightstand beside his photo. And for the first time in a year, I slept without waking from the dream of headlights and rain. The second year, it happened again. Same knock, same bouquet, same card. Happy birthday, Anna, with love, M. This time, I didn't call the shops. I just stood there at the door for a long moment, clutching the flowers to my chest, whispering, why? I had moved houses by then, across town, new address, new number, yet somehow they still found me. I told myself maybe one of his friends was doing it, someone from his unit or an old coworker. But when I reached out, they all swore they knew nothing about it. By the third year, the flowers had become part of my grief, a strange ritual that both hurt and healed. I'd stopped dating, stopped answering questions about moving on. How could I, when every year the universe reminded me that he hadn't really gone? People said it was unhealthy, that I was stuck in the past. But I didn't care. Those bouquets were proof of something I couldn't explain. Proof that love might stretch beyond time if you just refused to stop believing. On the morning of my 34th birthday, I woke before dawn. It was raining, soft and steady, the kind of rain that sounds like breathing against the windows. I waited for the knock, heart beating too fast. When it came, I almost laughed through my tears. I opened the door slowly, expecting to see the same arrangement. But this time, it was different. The lilies were replaced with white orchids, and the red rose was gone. My heart sank. The card was the same simple print, but the message had changed. For everything you didn't know, I'm sorry. With love, M. I dropped to my knees right there on the porch, clutching the flowers so tightly the stem snapped. For everything you didn't know, I whispered it over and over. What didn't I know? He died in a car accident. Click, tragic, senseless. There wasn't supposed to be anything else. But that message haunted me, replaying in my head like a heartbeat. That night I sat in the dark with every card spread across the table. The first 3 identical, and now this one. 4 birthdays, 4 bouquets, and a message that didn't feel like it came from the grave. It felt like someone alive was speaking through him, someone who knew more than I did. I stared at the cards for a long time before finally whispering the words I'd been afraid to say out loud. Who are you? And deep down, for the first time, I wanted the answer to not be my husband. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the new message. For everything you didn't know, I'm sorry. The words ran circles in my mind until they started to sound like an apology I was never meant to hear. By sunrise, I'd already made up my mind. I was going to find out who was sending the flowers. I'd spent too many years living between grief and hope, afraid that knowing the truth would ruin what little comfort those bouquets brought me. But now, the comfort had turned to unease. The apology had cracked something open in me that I couldn't ignore. I made a list of every florist in town and started calling. Most of them had heard my story. It's a small coastal town. People talk. They were kind, sympathetic, but none of them had any record of an order under my name, not current or past. I tried nearby towns too. Nothing. One owner, an older woman named June, said something that made me pause. "Sweetheart," she told me over the phone, "if those flowers are coming every year on the same day, same time, they're scheduled. Someone prepaid. You'd need to trace the first order to find the source." It made sense, but the thought chilled me. If they were prepaid, how far in advance had he planned them? I drove to the small post office where most deliveries in my area were logged. The clerk on duty, a man with kind eyes and coffee stains on his shirt, flipped through the records. "You said it's annual?" he asked. I nodded. "Always on this day, always the same time." He scanned a sheet and frowned. "There's no sender listed, but it's marked as special standing order. Looks like it originated 5 years ago." "5?" I whispered. "That was before he died." The clerk shrugged. "Whoever paid for it didn't want to be identified. Could have been him, could have been someone else using his name." I drove home in silence, the sound of the rain on the windshield matching the pounding of my heart. 5 years ago, 2 years before the accident. That meant Mark had set up the deliveries while he was still alive. But why? I pulled out an old photo album that evening, the one from our 5th anniversary. We were sitting on the porch of our first house, laughing, a bouquet of lilies and irises between us. "For your birthday and every one after," he'd told me then, "so you never forget that I'd still choose you." I remember laughing, saying, "Even if you're dead?" He'd grinned and kissed me. "Especially if I'm dead." At the time, I thought it was a joke, a romantic, morbid little joke. The next morning, I drove to the only place I hadn't checked, the small shop at the edge of town called Seaside Petals. It was where Mark had bought flowers for our wedding, the shop that had handled every anniversary bouquet he ever gave me. The windows were dusty, the open sign faded, but inside it smelled like memory, that mix of roses and rainwater and something old. A young man behind the counter looked up when I entered. "Can I help you?" he asked. I hesitated, then said, "I'm looking for information about a standing flower order. The name's Anna Hughes. My husband's name was Mark." The moment I said it, something flickered across his face. Recognition. Fear, maybe. He asked when I started getting them. 4 years ago, I said. "Same flowers every time. He's been gone 5. He set down the scissors in his hand slowly, then motioned me to follow him to the back room. It was small, filled with papers, vases, and faded photographs on the walls. He pulled out a thick, dust-covered ledger and flipped through it. "Your husband set this up himself," he said quietly. "He came in here 6 months before the accident, paid in cash, said he wanted a delivery every year on your birthday, same arrangement, same card." My breath hitched. "So it was him?" I whispered. "At first, yes," the florist said. "But..." He hesitated. "The order changed 3 years ago, after the second delivery. New handwriting on the instruction sheet, new payment method. The name on the account was different." "What name?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "Grace." My stomach twisted. "Grace who?" He flipped the page toward me. "Grace Parker."
I froze. I hadn't heard that name in years. Grace was Mark's sister, his only living family. We hadn't spoken since the funeral, not after the fight. She'd accused me of something I still didn't understand. She'd said, "He would have told you the truth if you just listened." I remember slamming the door on her that night, too angry to hear whatever secret she thought she owned. And now, somehow, she'd taken over the flower deliveries. "Do you have her address?" I asked. He nodded, scribbling it down. As I turned to leave, he called after me. "Mrs. Hughes?" I stopped. "When she renewed the order, she said it was a message your husband wanted her to give you when you were ready." "What message?" He hesitated, then said, "He didn't just love you, he was trying to protect you." The words hung in the air as I stepped outside into the cool salt breeze. Protect me? From what? The bouquet in my hands suddenly felt heavier than before, as if the flowers themselves were carrying the weight of something I didn't want to uncover. For the first time, I wasn't sure if I was chasing love anymore, or running straight toward the truth that might destroy it.
Grace lived in a small house by the edge of town, near the cliffs where the sea met the fog. I hadn't been there in years. The last time I saw her was at Mark's funeral. Her black dress soaked in rain, her eyes colder than the coffin she stood beside. I remember how she'd grabbed my wrist as I tried to leave, her voice trembling as she said, "You think you knew him, Anna, but you didn't. He was trying to tell you." I'd pulled away then, angry, shattered, unwilling to listen. But now, as I drove toward her house, those words echoed louder than the engine. The road curved sharply near the coast, and when her weathered blue house came into view, I almost turned around. Some truths, I thought, are like open doors in the dark. Once you walk through them, you don't get to go back. When she opened the door, Grace looked older, thinner. Time had not been kind to her. Her gray sweater hung loose in her frame, her hair tied back with a rubber band that looked like it was barely holding. But her eyes, those sharp green eyes so much like Mark's, hadn't changed. They flicked over me, assessing, cautious. "Anna," she said finally, her tone flat, "you shouldn't have come." "You're the one sending the flowers," I said, stepping inside before she could stop me. The house smelled like dust and salt, with stacks of papers covering every surface. "Why?" She sighed, closing the door behind me. "Because he asked me to." I stared at her. "He's been dead for 5 years." "He planned the first few deliveries himself," she said, crossing her arms. "But after he died, I continued them because he left instructions." "Instructions?" She nodded toward a box on the table. Inside were envelopes, neatly labeled with dates. My birthdays. "He left these for you, one for every year, until when?" I asked. Grace hesitated. "Until you knew." "Knew what?" I demanded. She turned away, walking toward the kitchen window where the waves crashed in the distance. "The night he died," she said, "he wasn't supposed to be on that road. He was driving to meet someone who'd been blackmailing him." My chest tightened. Blackmailing? For what? She looked back at me, her expression haunted. "For a secret that wasn't his to tell. Yours." The word hit me like a slap. "Mine? What are you talking about?" Grace stepped closer, her voice trembling now. "Mark found something out before the accident. Something about your past, about who you are." I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "Grace, I grew up here. I've lived in this town my entire life. There are no secrets about me." But she didn't laugh. "You were adopted, Anna." The world tilted. "That's not true." "It is," she said softly. "Your parents weren't your real parents. They couldn't have children. Your biological mother was someone else, someone who died the same year you were born. And Mark found out." I stumbled backward, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. "No," I whispered. "He would have told me." Grace shook her head. He was trying to. That's why he set up the deliveries. The flowers, the messages, they were supposed to lead you to me. But he never got the chance. The night he died, he called me from his car. He said he was on his way to meet the man who had the adoption records. He said if anything happened to him, I needed to finish what he started. Her voice cracked. 15 minutes later, his car went off the road. I pressed a hand to my mouth, fighting the tears. You're saying he didn't just die in an accident? I'm saying, Grace whispered, it might not have been. I turned toward the window, my reflection fractured by the rain streaking the glass. Everything I'd believed about my life, my marriage, my grief, all of it began to unravel. I looked back at her. Why didn't you tell me? She said, because you weren't ready. Because I thought you'd hate him for keeping it from you. And you? Do you hate him? She smiled faintly, sadness in her eyes. No. He was trying to protect you. From the man who didn't want you to know the truth. My voice shook. Who? She hesitated, then walked to a drawer and pulled out a faded photograph. It was a picture of a woman holding a baby. Me. The woman looked familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. Behind her stood a man I didn't recognize. Tall, dark suit, distant smile. That's your mother, Grace said, pointing to the woman. And that man beside her? That's your biological father. I stared at the picture, my pulse roaring in my ears. Who is he? Grace took a deep breath. His name is Robert Kalin. He's still alive. The name hit me like thunder. I knew it. Everyone did. Robert Kalin owned half the town. The Kalin Foundation funded hospitals, schools, the mayor's re-election campaign. He was practically royalty here. You're lying, I whispered. Why would Mark keep that from me? Grace's eyes softened. Because Robert Kalin didn't want you to know he existed. He paid your adoptive parents to keep you away, and when Mark found out, he started digging. That's what got him killed. I backed away slowly, shaking my head. No, I can't. Anna, Grace said gently, he left you something. It's in the last envelope, but you'll have to go to him to understand. She reached for my hand, pressing a small folded letter into it. He wanted you to have this when you were ready. I stared at it. His handwriting, familiar and steady. My heart felt like it was splintering in two. Grace's voice broke through my fog. He loved you more than anything, she said softly. But love doesn't always mean telling the truth. Sometimes it means protecting someone from it. When I left her house that night, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of salt and rain through the air. I sat in my car, staring at the letter in my hand. For 5 years, I thought I was mourning a man I knew completely. Now, I wasn't even sure I knew myself. The letter stayed sealed for 2 days. I couldn't bring myself to open it, not yet. Every time I tried, my hand started shaking. It was Mark's handwriting, the same looping letters I'd memorized from grocery lists, birthday cards, and love notes he used to leave on my pillow. Somehow, seeing it again made him feel alive, and that scared me more than anything. Because if what Grace said was true, he died trying to protect me from a truth that still hadn't finished burning its way through my life. Finally, on the 3rd morning, I sat by the window, the letter trembling in my hands, and tore it open. My Anna. If you're reading this, then Grace did what I asked her to, even though I begged her not to until she thought you were ready. I didn't want to keep anything from you. God knows I tried to tell you, but every time I looked at you, I couldn't. You had no idea how much of your life was built on someone else's silence. I found out about your father by accident. A man named Collins came to me with documents, birth records, hospital transfers, legal payments made in cash. He said your biological father wanted everything buried, and he offered me money to stay quiet. I refused. A week later, he called again, said if I didn't stop asking questions, I'd regret it. I wasn't afraid for me, Anna. I was afraid for you. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll live your life, not theirs. Promise you'll find the truth when you're strong enough to hear it. The flowers were just a way to keep you close, to remind you that I never left. I'll always love you, and when you find him, don't hate him. He'll be your last link to who you really are. M. By the time I finished, my vision was a blur. The paper was damp with tears, the ink bleeding at the edges. He had known, all of it, and somehow, even in death, he'd been leading me to this moment. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my coat pocket. If my biological father was still alive, he owed me more than an explanation. He owed me the truth about the man I loved and the life I never asked for. The Callan estate sat on a hill overlooking the ocean, 3 stories of glass and stone, surrounded by manicured gardens. It looked sterile, expensive, and utterly detached from the world that had raised me. I parked outside the gates and told myself I could still turn back, but I didn't. I pressed the intercom button and said the name I'd rehearsed all night. My name is Anna Hughes. I'm here to see Robert Callan. The voice that came through was mechanical. Do you have an appointment? No, I said, but tell him his daughter's here. The gate opened. The house smelled of lemon polish and wealth. A maid led me to a study filled with books and cold light. He was sitting behind a desk, gray-haired, immaculate in a navy suit, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. When he looked up, the world tilted. I'd seen that face before, not in real life, but in the mirror. Same jawline, same eyes. He didn't look surprised, just tired. I was wondering when you'd come, he said quietly. I stood there, my hands clenched at my sides. You knew about me? Of course, he said. I arranged everything. You arranged my entire life? My adoption, my name, my parents, everything? He sighed, leaning back. Your mother was complicated. I wasn't ready to be a father and she... Stop, I said. Don't talk about her like she was a problem to solve. His eyes flickered. You look like her, he murmured. She'd have been proud of you. Then why did you pay to erase me? Why did you hide me? He looked away, swirling the untouched whiskey. Because I was married, Anna. Because I had another life, another family. Your mother didn't want to destroy it, and I let her make that choice. I thought it was mercy. And Mark? I asked, my voice breaking. Did you have him killed for finding out? His head snapped up, genuine shock flashing across his face. Killed? God, no. Is that what you think? I didn't answer. The night he died, he said slowly. He called me. He said he'd found the man who'd been blackmailing me. I told him not to meet him. I told him I'd handle it. But he went anyway. He rubbed his temples. The crash wasn't an accident. The police called it one because I told them to. I couldn't stand the investigation, the attention. But I swear to you, I didn't touch him. If anything, I failed him. I stared at him, my heart heavy with fury and disbelief. You failed everyone, I said quietly. You failed my mother, you failed me, and you failed the man who died trying to do what you never had the courage to do. He winced, but didn't argue. You sound like her, he said softly. She used to say the same thing. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. He loved you, he said. Mark. He called me a week before the accident, said he couldn't live with the lie anymore. He wanted to tell you everything. I begged him to wait. He didn't listen. He exhaled, defeated. He was a good man. I turned back toward him. He was the best man I ever knew, I said, my voice steady now.
and you'll spend the rest of your life trying to deserve the grace he died with." I walked out without looking back. Outside, the ocean wind was sharp, the air heavy with salt. I stood at the edge of the cliff behind the estate, the waves roaring below, and took Mark's letter from my pocket. The paper fluttered in the wind, alive for one last moment. I read the last line again. "Don't hate him. He'll be your last link to who you really are." For the first time, I understood. He didn't mean blood or legacy. He meant forgiveness. I let the letter go. It drifted away, caught by the wind, spinning upward before disappearing into the gray horizon. For a moment, I imagined Mark there in the distance, not gone, just waiting beyond the places I could see. The sea thundered below, endless and alive, and I whispered, "You were right. I'm finally ready."
It had been 3 months since I stood on the cliffs outside the Callan estate, the wind tearing Mark's letter from my hands and scattering it across the sea like ashes. I'd spent those months trying to live quietly, though quiet had become a stranger to me. The truth had filled every empty space Mark once occupied, its weight settling into corners of my life I didn't know existed. I'd stopped dreaming about him the way I used to. Now, when he appeared in my mind, it wasn't the night of the crash I saw. It was his smile. Tired, knowing, almost as if he'd already been standing on the other side of a secret too big for this world. I thought that would be the end of it, that the truth, as painful as it was, would be enough. But the morning of my next birthday proved me wrong. When the knock came, I didn't answer right away. I knew that sound too well. Soft, polite, followed by silence. For 5 years, it had been the same. My stomach twisted as I walked to the door. There, on the mat, was the final bouquet. White lilies, blue irises, and one single red rose. My breath hitched. I hadn't seen that combination since the year he died. The florist must have made a mistake, I thought. Until I saw the card. It wasn't printed this time. It was handwritten. And it was his handwriting. "Happy birthday, my Anna. This is the last one. If it's reached you, it means you found what I couldn't say. I know the truth hurt you. I hated myself for keeping it. But if you're reading this, then you faced it and you're still standing. That's all I ever wanted. Not for you to remember me, but for you to remember yourself. You were never anyone's secret. You were my miracle. I loved you enough to let you hate me if that's what it took to set you free. And if someday you find peace, promise me this. Plant the flowers. Don't keep them. Let something new grow. You'll know when it's time. M." I read the letter 3 times before I could move. His words wrapped around me like warmth and grief all at once. This was his goodbye. Not the kind that breaks you, but the kind that stitches you back together. He hadn't written it to haunt me. He'd written it to release me. I took the bouquet outside, into the small garden behind the house. The rain from the night before had left the soil soft, ready. I dug a shallow hole and placed the flowers inside, pressing the earth gently over the stems. My hands shook, dirt catching under my fingernails, but I didn't wipe it away. When I was done, I stood back, breathing in the smell of wet soil and salt air. For a long time, I just stood there. Then I whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular. Maybe to him, maybe to the world. Maybe to the version of myself that had finally stopped waiting for the next knock. A week later, I got a letter in the mail from Grace. It was short, just a few lines written in her uneven script. "He told me once that love doesn't end, it just changes shape. I think he'd be proud of what you did, the flowers, the truth, all of it. You deserved to know Anna, and now you can live for both of you." I folded it and set it beside the photo of Mark on the mantel. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was talking to a ghost. I felt like I was finally talking to someone who'd already let me go.
That evening, as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, I walked out to the garden. The first sprout had already appeared, small, green, impossibly alive. I knelt beside it, pressing my palm gently to the earth. The wind was soft, almost kind, carrying the faint scent of lilies. Somewhere inside that breeze, I thought I heard him, not as a voice, but as a feeling. Not goodbye, just go on. I stood, brushing dirt from my hands, and looked at the sky as it deepened into twilight. Life felt fragile again, but not broken. For the first time, the ache in my chest wasn't about what I'd lost, it was about what I'd found. I walked back towards the house, the garden fading behind me, and when I reached the porch, I saw something that made me stop. A small envelope taped to the door. No flowers this time. Just one card, blank, except for 4 words written in familiar handwriting. You kept your promise. I pressed it to my heart and smiled. The flowers had stopped coming, but the love hadn't. It had just changed shape. Just like Grace said, maybe that was all love ever did. Turn into something softer, quieter, strong enough to survive us. When I closed the door that night, the world didn't feel haunted anymore. It just felt alive.